Welcome to Season 2 of Difference Talks, brought to you by the LaBeouf Marketing, Communications, and Training Team. Our guests are inspiring people who share their stories of brand differentiation. Based on our book, The Power of Differentiation, our goal is to inspire 1 million people with the message that winning hearts and minds are the first step in growing market share. Now, on with the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Difference Talks. I'm Barry LaBeouf, CEO, founder of LaBeouf Marketing Communication. With me today as co-host is Marcus McMillan, who is our VP and co-owner. Our guest today is Dan Starr, CEO of both Do It Best and True Value hardware stores. They represent 8,500 retailers in 55 countries worldwide. Today, we're not going to talk about commerce primarily. We're going to talk about culture. So I'd like to turn it over to you, Dan, so we just hit the ground running to tell you how you came to Do It Best, because you're an attorney and originally you worked for them. So Dan, take it away.
Yeah, okay. And cut me off, Barry, because that's a wide open field for me to go into. I'm happy to do it. But yes, my formal training is that in the legal profession, and I had always desired to go into business. So it was an econ major and then going to law school and taking as many tax courses as I could. Mergers and acquisitions was what I wanted to practice. And I worked at a large Midwestern law firm, and Do It Best was one of the clients. That's exactly right. And over time, I both became a partner in that law firm and then got closer and closer and closer to this one particular client because there was such a great, I would say, affinity for some of the cultural issues that they had. And they were just unlike any other company that I did work for. And I just wanted to get to know them better and work more directly for them.
So how did you come to work there? How did that happen? Just curiously, because a lot of times that's not how you get in that door.
Well, the story on that is when I was a very young lawyer, I was hired by a guy by the name of David Heist. Dave was a lawyer and a partner at this firm. And shortly after working at that firm, Dave left and went to go work for this company called Do It Best. So he was their general counsel. He became VP of sales. He became their chief operating officer. And so he progressed through that company. And all the while I was doing work for Do It Best, or, for the company through that law firm, and interacting with Dave. And one day we had lunch and he was talking with me, and it was pretty apparent he wanted to hire me a second time. And I think owing to my admiration for him and my confidence in who he was as a person, but also, as I said, the culture of Do It Best, it prompted me to go, yeah, I like the practice of law. It's really interesting. It's good work. It's good being your own boss in a way, but I think I want to change my career and go work for this company.
Yeah, it's that. I mean, what a shift to be able to do that. And what was it specifically that drew you into that? I mean, you said that you've always wanted to dive into business, but
yeah.
Was it a connection to the culture? Was it a connection to that type of industry? What exactly was that? And were you counsel when you came on, or
I was?
Else?
I started as general counsel, so I was the lawyer for the company, but then also I was the head of HR, and so business lawyers don't have any business being the head of HR, by the way. But I tried to learn that role. But on what was the attraction? I think there's two things going on there. If I can I'll try to break it down quickly. I think one is just the opportunity to go in-house at all. If you're a lawyer doing work for a company and you get to know that company, excuse me, a little frog in my throat. The opportunity that you get is to get closer to the organization. Lawyers are expensive, and people don't really like to hire them if they don't have to. And so I would come in and I would work on a project. I would work on a transaction. I would work on an acquisition. But they wanted to get me out as soon as possible because they're paying an exorbitant hourly rate for my services. And so that really limited my exposure to getting close to the company, getting close to the center of decision making to help guide, strategy. And so the opportunity itself was to get to that. And that's very attractive to me. If I care I don't want to have to shut that off and then leave. I'd rather get my hands dirty and get directly invested in what's going on there. But I would say more importantly is why that company. I wouldn't have done that for just, I guess the operative word there was you care. I cared about this company because I thought it was such a great mission and model and culture. And those are the things that drove me. They attracted me to that company so strongly that I'm like, I'm ready to give up on that career and go do something else.
Wow.
One thing I will share that's a personal connection is that the president of Do It Best a number of years ago, when it was actually called Hardware Wholesalers, was Don Wolf. And Don influenced the way I run my company to this day. He was an older gentleman at the time, probably my age that I am now. And I asked him, I said, would you give me a few minutes, Mr. Wolf, because what you're doing is so amazing. And I'd like to learn from you. And much to my surprise, he said, yeah, come on in. I still remember this day. I walked into his office. He was so laid back and informal. He sat on the side of his desk and said, okay, young man, let me tell you what we do here. And he described how their culture was about serving others. Yeah. And that what he felt he needed to do at Do It Best was to serve his people, because if he can serve them, then they will serve the end users. And he inspired me. He talked about how they, at Do It Best, how they would share bonuses with everybody. Everybody felt a part of the team. Dan, turning to you, was that part of what drew you in? And then what is today's Do It Best culture?
Yeah. So I'll start with Don as well. Don was our second president and CEO. We've only had 5 in our entire history from 1945. Don took over that role in 1967, and he held it until 1992. It's a pretty good chunk of time. And he is, more than anybody else, the person who defined our culture. He's the one who gave us our philosophy as a company, which is serving others as you would like to be served. And, we like to say much more than just a phrase that you stick on a wall. That is something that defines who we are and how we behave. And decisions are made with that mantra in mind. And he did I think for Don, it was a very simple formula. It was, that posture of service defines so well how we interact with our customer. Our customer is our shareholder. And that alignment of customer and shareholder is a very powerful thing for us. And I think it was for him an easy thing to think of it in terms of mission and take that servant posture towards them. And then he basically said, we got to apply that exact same posture to everything else, every other form of engagement that we have. That's how we treat one another. That's certainly how you invest in your team. That's how you engage with the community. That's how you treat your vendors. Credibility in this industry is critical for us. And I think he was way ahead of his time in saying, I don't pound the table. I don't get nasty. Mm-hmm. We always speak the truth. And then we engage in ways that are kind, appropriate, deferential when needed, and certainly respectful. And you're right, though. You mentioned profits. If I can dwell on that for just a second.
Yes,
please. Because it goes on to this day. Early in Don's tenure, we started a profit-sharing program, and the formula is pretty simple. You get to the end of the year, you calculate your entire net profit. The first 10% is taken off the top and reserved for employees. And then the remainder of that is sent in a dividend distribution out to our members in proportion to the volume of business that they do with us through the course of the year. So that's how we are defined as a co-op, a non-exempt cooperative, because we take that dividend distribution and return it to our members. And but that 10%, to this day, you take that last year, that was roughly about 20%. You take someone's base salary and their bonus, you total that up. If you were to take that times about 20%, that's how much is coming to them in the form of profit sharing. And we use it to invest in retirement programs. So the typical business has a 401k. You might contribute. The employee has to contribute in order to get something from the typical employer, and they might get a match. Maybe it's 100%, maybe it's 50%, up to the first 6%. That's standard. At Do It Best, the employee didn't have to contribute a thing. And it's more likely about 13-14% of their total annual compensation that is put into a retirement account for them. And that's a powerful ownership message that you're giving people. I'm sorry to drone on and on about it. Don would be upset with me for the technical explanation. Right. It's much more important to say you're driving alignment to the shareholders. You're driving accountability in a way that affects people's bottom lines, and it gets them bought into the business. Who cares about the technical percentages and all that stuff? Speak to people about, we care about them. We care about their retirement. We care about their future. We're going to invest in them, and make sure that they understand that this is something that we take as a critical aspect of who we are, because we're all kind of in it together. I'm covered by the same plan as somebody who works part-time in a warehouse in Nevada. Yeah.
You've just explained an experience. It's a lifetime experience that, when you're an employee for Do It Best, what you get out of that is much more than dollars and cents. It's something very deep, and it's a care for your well-being now, tomorrow, and next, as well as your family. So yeah, what's culture like today? Beyond what you've already shared.
Yeah, and I would say that I hope that culture lives on. I'd be very concerned if our culture took a step back under my direction. But Don his influence is still with us today. There's a lot of folks who know him personally who still work for Do It Best, myself included, and we still speak in terms of that philosophy that he gave us, and it still guides hiring decisions. It still guides decisions on how we go to market, and certainly how we interact with one another. So I would say that culture lives on very, very strongly. And, we not just speak in terms of that, but I think at every stage, especially the hiring stage, you got to be real careful that someone isn't looking at that as some kind of shtick. That's not, it's not a marketing slogan or something like that. They got to understand that culture looks different. Because especially in leadership, if someone came into our culture who had sort of a command and control background and felt like that's how I lead, I'm not trying to say anything negative about that. That can be a method of leadership that works in some environments. It just wouldn't work in ours. I think that we have a very clear expectation that when you're in a leadership role, the team comes first, the member comes first, the member retailer comes first, your team comes second. Your needs really come at the end of that equation, and that's the way it needs to be. And your goal is to make them successful, not be some sort of autocratic command and control person.
One fascinating aspect to this is you just acquired True Value, which literally doubled the size of your enterprise. What are you doing to ensure that your culture is maintained, hopefully even grows?
Yeah. That's such a great question, because anytime you engage in an acquisition, a merger or an acquisition, and bring on a lot of folks, you immediately put some of that culture that you've worked so hard for, you put it at risk. Because they don't have a history. You've got a lot of people who don't, they weren't indoctrinated in the same way, and you're bringing many, many on at the same time. So that produces a lot of risk. One way I tried to address that, Barry, was we had an onboarding event in Chicago. That's where their headquarters, True Value's headquarters, are, up by O'Hare. And went to their corporate office. This was early January of this year. And where we had an onboarding event for 400 or so people, and we asked them to come into the office. And the first thing we did was we served them breakfast. That's a small thing, but when you have leadership, put on the apron, get behind the food service line, and greet people, and tell them you're happy to be here. It's a small thing, but it's an important detail. And then you serve them food, and you just interact with them like a normal person. Their expectations are clouded with all kinds of preconceived notions about who you are and what you're doing there. And I think you just meet them where they are. You break bread with them. And then you invite them into a conversation. And the first thing that I did in that meeting was I stood up in front of them for about 15, 20 minutes to try to deliver a unified message, a vision of who we are as one company. We have, yes, 2 different retail brand names that we're going to use and some different format issues. And there are kind of different business units. But my goal was to reinforce that we are one company and one vision and one group of people. And this is how we treat people. And I went right into servant leadership. And it's not about how you act at the office. It's who you are. That posture doesn't leave you. It's not fake. You can't fake it. You genuinely, I think I was sharing this with you before. If you're in a leadership role, you have to genuinely care about the people in your charge. Because if you don't, over time, I really believe you're going to start to resent them because they'll end up taking so much from you. If you don't genuinely care about them and their well-being, it starts to weigh on you and you start acting out in ways that are just not healthy. So I think if you genuinely care about the people in your charge, it makes you a much better leader.
This is fantastic input and heartfelt. We will return after break, and we're going to dig into a few other topics with Dan Starr. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening to Difference Talks.
Difference Talks is a LaBeouf production. Our focus is differentiation, and we believe it's more important than ever to differentiate your brand and experience. Contact us at labeouf.com for a conversation. We'd love to connect with you.
Welcome back to Difference Talks, everybody. We're with Dan Starr, CEO of Do It Best and True Value. Dan, can you share an instance where you witnessed or were part of an incredible challenge where you had to rally people, where people had to believe and understand that, hey, things are not easy. Things are tough. I mean, you think about all the years Do It Best has been in existence. There have to have been some very difficult economic times. Share, if you can, with our audience what you witnessed and how you found Do It Best to act as a collective culture.
Okay, happy to do that. So let me start with the problem. All right. And this was early on in my leadership at Do It Best. We had a business unit of Do It Best that was called Retail Data Processing. What they were a collection of programmers, installers on the IT side who would go out to these member store locations and install and run a point of sale system, right? Pretty familiar with point of sale. You get up to the cash register and you've got a piece of software that kind of runs that experience at the register and it reconciles to inventory, that kind of thing. So we had about 65 people who were part of this. And what our leadership recognized was that the technology running those systems was starting to just really get sophisticated. And that our system, which was very well supported by our team, and we have a great team, it wasn't going to be able to keep up. And if it were, you'd have to invest millions of dollars in development costs. And our market for that was very limited. As I said, we have about 4,000 members. Well, that's great. But if you have only 4,000 potential customers of any product, and it requires significant investment, you do the math and you go, this doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So the business reality was you can go out and for businesses where this is their core business is point of sale or software, you can go out and you can buy that or you can license that at a more effective cost than what we would do to develop that the way that we would need to. So there's the problem. Yeah. You have 65 people whose lives are dependent upon their job who are in this department. And we just decided, think back through that. Oh, we decided that this cannot go on and it doesn't make sense for our members. And, I talk about our member retailers. That's our first priority. When I say servant leadership, the business comes first, and they are why we're here. You got to satisfy why you're here first. So, what I hate is when people use servant leadership as an excuse to avoid reality. Yeah. You can't do that, and you're not going to stay in business very long if you try to use You're not a charity, and you don't exist just to employ people. You exist for a business reason. And I think that that's critical that you understand it. Now, how do you make decisions within that? When it's time to make a difficult decision, how do you honor your culture or what you say you believe in? When you have 65 people who work there and they are doing a great job, how do you tell them we've made a business decision, and how do you roll out that decision? Well, what I witnessed was, first of all, someone who had the courage to be truthful. And so this leader stood up in front of that group of people. He wasn't going to hide from it in a live setting and said, I need to walk you through something. And this is a very difficult message. And then shared the business reality and said, we are going to sunset this. Now, how do you do that in that environment and honor the culture? What he came up with was a plan to sunset it over 5 years. And that made it easier on the member retailer to transition them, but it made it easier on the team impacted. And he made this promise. If you want to work here, if you want to continue to work here, we'll make sure that you have a role. It may not be the most prized career role that you could have asked for, but we're not going to ask you to take a step backward. And we're going to find a role from you. It may require that you commit to some training. It may require that you do some things differently, but we'll make sure that there's something here for you. And we'll work on that over that sunset period. And then he put me in charge of it. Oh, man. Shoot. but that meant a lot to me. And he was very well criticized at the time. Nobody really wanted that decision to be made, not in our environment, and not the member retailers. They loved that product. They loved it because we serviced the heck out of it. It wasn't a good product, but he made that decision. He made the right decision. And what's interesting is what happened over time. We were successful in getting many of those people in different roles in different divisions in our company. And not only were those people affected by that and encouraged by that, they were like, I can't believe what our company did for me, because they figured out a way to kind of get me into a different and give me a second chance and give me a career. And they know full well that at most companies, they would have just been let go. Like, bam, you're gone, sorry, but that's business. You got to go. And so the folks who were directly affected by that, it really changed their outlook on what it meant to be an employee of this company. And then I noticed something else. Over the course of the decade after that decision, people are always watching. The people who weren't directly impacted by that decision, who were kind of standing in the wings, working in other parts of our company, observing how that all went down, they've told me in the years since, you have no idea what that meant to see how we behave when things are tough and how you make that real to employees. It bought, I don't think that's not the reason for the decision, but it bought a level of loyalty that I don't think we ever really expected.
You've mentioned a few things in there where, you're speaking truth, there's reality to it. You're doing things that are it's not easy. The easy thing is, goodbye, cut loose. All right, we're moving forward. We're moving in this pace. We talked about earlier too, that leadership versus the rest of the employees don't always know, change management or whatever may be going on. You've got kind of the blinders on. That individual didn't, and that carries you forward ongoing, right? And that's one of those special moments of not doing what's easy, not doing the simple thing, and it's going to pay off, but it's not the short term, thing. It's more long term.
Yeah, and it was. I don't want to overstate it, but I look at that, and as I said, it was very formative for me as a young leader to see what he went through to try to make that decision, how he delivered that decision. Just that idea that you don't hide the truth and you don't hide from reality. You're there to make tough decisions sometimes, and sometimes it has negative consequences for individuals. You got to own that. But you have some degree of latitude, certainly, in the way that is rolled out. And so that always taught me that, all right, so let's make the right decision. Let's not hide from that. Now, as a secondary principle, how does that play out in this organization? What are the cultural implications from having made that decision? Can we roll it out, do it, stage it, affect it differently in a way that makes sure that we're preserving those things that are critical to who we are. We got to be true to who we say we are. How can we, kind of maybe modify or adjust what the right business decision is and still own that decision, but make sure that we do it in a way that we are walking the talk on our cultural conviction. And I think that's a critical thing for us as an organization, that we constantly bear that in mind when we make decisions, because many, many, many decisions come out and they affect people sometimes in ways you didn't expect. And you just got to be real careful in how you treat people.
Marcus, you always ask a question that I think is important, and I think this would be a great time for that. I think Dan would be really ready for it.
One of our favorite questions, best day. What is your best day, Dan? And, that kind of comes with a caveat of it's not a day that you're putting your feet up and you're like zoned out and you don't have energy. It's actually the opposite. It's a day that you've finished whatever it is, you've worked with your team, you've overcome something substantial, and you're energized, you're thrilled, you're excited. You're taking something away from that day and going, man, I'm using this to go forward. What's that day like for you?
That is a great question. My best day, I've had many of them, but it usually follows this basic formula. I have someone, typically a leader, come into my office and say, you're not going to believe what just happened. And they will share a story with me of someone on their team or they themselves stepping up and doing something that makes a difference. That could be for an employee, that could be for one of our members. There's been so many occasions where there's an unexpected opportunity, and then you see someone step into leadership in a way that just does you proud, right? And to see someone get a win, that's my best day. When I see somebody else get a win, it's not, I'm just like anybody else. I get a charge out of doing something well or doing something with excellence. That's not my best day. My best day is when I really see somebody on my team succeed. And that is so thrilling to me. I get emotional about that kind of stuff. Now, I also have a habit of saying to my leadership team, not in that moment. You got to pick your moment, right? Not in that moment, but I also have a habit of sharing with people on our leadership team. It's never as good as you think. It's also never as bad as you think. So there are high highs and there are low lows sometimes. And I try to brace them for both of them to appreciate the fact that as good as it gets, celebrate it, enjoy it, definitely slap high fives with the team. But when you're back in your office, understand it's never as good as you think. Just temper some of your own expectations. But also, even more importantly, there are tough days in serving our team. Tough days in serving folks who do retail. Oh my goodness. And I think just encouraging them, you can lose a big customer. There are days you're going to lose. Just understand it's never as bad as you think. It's going to be okay. Take a minute. Those lessons to me, I love to celebrate the wins, but I think you also got to temper how people go about wearing that. You know what I'm saying?
Yep. It's always, you always enjoy those moments, but those teachable moments where you can, it's like, man, what we talked about actually did something, and us working as a larger group move the needle for that person. I agree with you. That's some of the most substantial stuff. And it harkens back to all that you've talked about: the heart, the care, the focus on the team, not doing things for the short term, doing it for the long haul. To have folks come back to you and say, what they did, what you do, Dan, has meant the most to me, but it didn't happen on that day. And actually, there might have been ridicule at first, but then over time, wow, that really set in, and it just washed over me. Years later, it's like, my gosh, they did something incredible. That's really special. So
yeah, and I can give you a real specific example too. There's like, well, this is how it impacts people. This is not strictly about a business win or a big sale. No, there was one where I was so proud of one of our leaders, and this is in an HR area where you have someone who's just not performing as they need to perform. And how do you manage a tough situation when there's performance management related issues and you owe some accountability there? and we had someone who worked with worked with that individual, worked with our HR team, and that leader just sensed that there was something else going on. This has happened more than once. And they thought, this is just unusual. And went a little bit beyond the policy manual to learn what was driving some of this behavior, because it was just out of the norm. And when you find that there are personal circumstances, or there is a health issue, or there is some unique situation. I don't know if you've ever seen the orientation video that Chick-fil-A does. It's called Everyone Has a Story, and it's a reminder for people to understand that you have a lot of personal circumstances that drive behavior sometimes. And there's a lot that we can do to extend a little bit of understanding, appreciation of that background, where people are. You got a lot of people who are hurt and a lot of people who are hurting. And when I saw a leader who stepped kind of outside the legitimate expectations of, the work needs to get done. I need to hold people accountable for it. Yeah, set that aside for just a second. Make sure you understand what's going on in this person's life, and then extend a little bit of grace. And what that meant to the person who received that, it's not about making sure that the business is going to be profitable. It's about just providing human kindness at times in the right way. And then when you do the right thing in that circumstance, I think you're rewarded for that. That person, even if they need to go on to another job or another setting, or best of all circumstances, they turn it around. You get them through that low spot. They come back, and because they were treated with such grace, they become your best employees. When I see that taking place in our organization, I have assurance that the culture is in good hands. That's the kind of thing that makes me proud.
Well, I want to thank you, Dan Starr. Your message today is inspiring. It's really what Jason Lippert talked about in one of our podcasts, where making your culture your competitive advantage. And that's what you've done with Do It Best. And since 1945, this organization's been great, but with your leadership, it's taking off beyond that. So congratulations on that success. And I know you take it to heart, because as you said, things aren't as great as they seem, and they're not as bad as they seem. But I want to thank you and Marcus today, because this is inspiring. It's about humans. It's winning the hearts and minds of your people. And that's what this is all about. So Dan, thank you. And I want to thank everybody for listening and or watching Difference Talks.
Thank you for joining us on Difference Talks. All of us at LeBeau are proud to celebrate great people with inspiring messages. Difference Talks was created, produced, engineered, and performed by the LeBeau team. Even the music is original. Contact us at lebeau.com to learn how to differentiate your brand and give your team a sense of significance and meaning.